What if I told you that 500 years ago, Italy had no marinara sauce, Indian food had no chilies, and the Irish had never even seen a potato? So much iconic, authentic cuisine would be unrecognizable to a native of the culture 500 years ago. No Swiss chocolate, Mexican food without limes, an American apple pie? Forget it. And this is because of what historians call the Columbian Exchange. While this is an event heavy with real-world history, it's also incredibly valuable for world builders to study and understand. There is a lot of tragedy associated with the Columbian Exchange, but today we are focusing on food, because culinary transformations are a great example of how contact between cultures can completely reshape what we think of as traditional. It's also incredibly valuable for world building, and it's a great show don't tell of the wide impacts of cultural exchange too. Just in case you don't know me, I'm Janet from World Anvil, a published author, a game writer, and a world building expert. So let's look at how the Columbian Exchange transformed everyday cultures around the world, and the lessons you can apply when creating worlds of your own. So what is the Columbian Exchange? Simply put, it's the widespread transfer of plants, animals, diseases, people, and cultures between the American continents and the rest of the world following Columbus's journey in 1492. Just a sidebar that Columbus was by no means the first European to reach the Americas. Viking explorers like Leif Erikson arrived on American shores 500 years before Columbus. From a food perspective, the Columbian Exchange was history's largest ingredient swap. Tomatoes, potatoes, corn, cacao, chilies, these all travelled east across the Atlantic. Wheat, rice, coffee, citrus, cattle, all headed west. And these ingredients didn't just add variety, they fundamentally transformed food and agriculture across the world. And they transformed the ecosystems they entered. Now, the Columbian Exchange involved much more than food. Technologies, ideas, invasive species, and tragically, diseases. It's an event with profound consequences that still shape our world today. But we're focusing on food because the culinary transformations show us how contact between cultures can completely reshape what we think of as traditional. And that's valuable for world building. So let's look at some specific examples, starting with one that might make you rethink your next plate of pasta. When you picture Italian cuisine, you're probably thinking rich arrabbiata sauce, eggplant parmigiana, and that old standby cheese and tomato pizza. We've already mentioned that tomatoes didn't exist in Italy until the 16th century. They originate in Mexico and Central America. But here's the kicker. When they first arrived, Italians thought they were poisonous. And actually, this wasn't paranoia. Wealthy Italians used pewter plates, and the acidity of tomatoes would leach the lead from it, which caused lead poisoning. Talk about a heavy meal. What, too soon? But the poor ate off wooden plates, and they discovered that tomatoes were not only safe, but delicious, and they grew really well in the Italian climate. By the 18th century, tomatoes had become a staple of southern Italian peasant food, and fast forward today, the tomato is the defining ingredient of Italian cuisine. And by the way, the eggplant in your eggplant parm, another vegetable from the Americas. So what's the world building lesson here? Well, a foreign ingredient can become culturally definitive, even if it has a rocky start. And if it thrives in the climate, it's delicious, and it fills people's bellies, people will adopt it wholeheartedly. In fact, insalata caprese, red, white, and green, is a dish that represents the Italian flag. The red is, you guessed it, tomato. Of course, the other world-building lesson here is that we, as humans, have very short memories. To get the full picture of today in your world, it's important to go back a century or 5, because the things we think of as established and traditional really haven't been around that long. Now let's get spicy. When you think of Indian cuisine, you're probably thinking of chili peppers. But every single variety of chili pepper originated in the Americas. Before the late 15th and early 16th centuries, Indian cuisine used black pepper for heat. But when chilies arrived, they spread like wildfire. Chili pepper plants adapted perfectly to the climate, they grew easily, and they provided a new version of a flavor that was already sought after. Here's where it gets really interesting, because cultures didn't just adopt chili peppers, they adapted them. This is bhut jolokia, or ghost pepper from northeast India. Like many of the world's hottest peppers, it's an Asian cultivar, selectively bred over centuries. Thai bird's eye chilies, Korean gochugaru, all developed from an originally American ingredient and transformed into something distinctly their own. So the world-building lesson here: when a new ingredient amplifies something a culture already values, like India's spice traditions, adoption can be swift. But it doesn't stop there. Cultures adapt and refine trade goods, making them their own, until the result may even surpass the original. Sorry, Americans. I feel like I'm getting a lot of angry comments about chili peppers. But I mentioned potatoes, a vegetable close to my own spirit. So let's talk about Ireland. From shepherd's pie to colcannon, the humble spud is an absolute staple of Irish cuisine. Although potatoes originally came from the Andes, they grew incredibly well in Ireland's climate, producing massive yields from small plots. Nutritious enough to sustain families almost entirely on their own, the potato was a miracle crop. Until it wasn't. By the 19th century, a huge proportion of the Irish population, particularly the poor, were dependent on a single variety of potato, and when potato blight hit in 1845, the result was catastrophic. The Great Famine killed over 1 million people and forced another million to emigrate. Because monoculture, and really any reliance on a single source of nutrition like this, is a disaster waiting to happen. In your world building, what happens when the crops fail? When a miracle crop or trade good becomes too central to your people's way of life, it creates this vulnerability, and this overdependence can create high-stakes drama and very scary consequences in your settings and your stories. World building is an interconnected nexus of cause and effect, of actions and reactions. Tomatoes transformed Italian identity, chili set Asia on fire, and potatoes created abundance, and then tragedy in Ireland. But here's the crucial thing. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The Columbian Exchange transferred plants, animals, peoples, diseases, technologies, and ideas both ways, and some of its effects were devastating. Food is just one thread in a much larger and more complex tapestry, and that's exactly what makes it so valuable as a world-building lesson. Because in your world, a new luxury item or staple crop will never exist in isolation either. Each choice and introduction will have ripple effects on the economy, on culture, on ideas. Markets rise and crash as tastes change. Farmers have to adapt or face financial disaster. New ingredients can be status symbols or peasant staples. And what about trade routes? Who controls them? And who profits? Any period of swift and dramatic change will quickly expand beyond its simple chain of cause and effect. It's not just world building, it's world changing. So when you're mapping trade and culture contact in your world, don't just ask what moves from place to place, ask what changes because of it. The most authentic, dynamic cultures and worlds are the ones that evolve. So if you want to go deeper and map the effects of trade on your world, we have a video about exactly that. Check it out after this one. But in the meantime, be sure to like and comment for more thought-provoking world-building advice. Then, as always, grab your hammer and go world build.